Just catching y'all up a little bit. It's been, what, a day or so since I did a video. Since I posted the last one, I have been working long hours very diligently trying to bring this little 66 Volkswagen back to life as best I can. So I wanted to review right quick with this. Part of my initial wash process was, one of the steps was the contact strip wash. For that, I used a product by Meguiar's called Wash Plus, which is a car soap that they claim polishes while you wash, which to some degree might be true, but it's not a product you want to use on every car. I reserve it for cars like this that are extremely bad and I'm going to have to do paint correction on anyway, because it will, despite their claims, mar the paint. So, but it comes in real handy when you're doing a car like this where you really need to get down and scrub. And you know, then it was decontaminated with iron X. I'm having a problem with that word. Then after all that was done and the final rinse and all that, drying with forced air, as you recall, I did a test spot up there on the roof. Some of you may recall that, but then I ended up using probably 3 different grits of wet dry sandpaper, which the entire car now has been wet sanded, every square millimeter of it, painted surfaces. And some of the spots were much worse than others, so I had to keep dropping down and get a little bit more aggressive, which I had to proceed very carefully because this crappy paint job that was put on here, very fragile, so you have to go slowly and carefully. Those lower grits, it's not for the faint of heart or the inexperienced. You have to be very careful. And when I dropped down to those lower grits of sandpaper, I had to step back up to remove some of those sanding marks with a lighter grade of sandpaper to make the buffing easier and quicker when I got to it, or when I get to it. And it also saves your pads. If you don't do that, then you have to buff and buff and buff, and your pads keep getting gunked up, and you have to keep changing pads, or absolutely have to clean the buffing pad after 2 or 3 little passes in a small area. So that helps a little bit. So as you recall, I've compounded the entire roof. It looks way better. And after lots and lots of work on this hood, which was one of the worst spots, as some of you may recall, I've actually compounded that area right there. And as you can see, I've moved down here, and I'm going to have to work on that spot right there. I've compounded it a little bit, but not much. I have to be careful because of, see where the paint has been dinged off or something, all the way down to the metal there. There's some cracking in here. So I have to be very careful with that so I don't remove that paint where it's starting to crack off. And as you move on down, you see other defects in the painting. Once I got all this paint stripped down to the bare essentials, so to speak, I noticed that it looked like somebody had sanded it before, that probably didn't really know what they were doing, and they sanded down into the paint, and in some spots down to the primer, in addition to the other damage that had been caused probably by car washes with brushes and that sort of thing. And then whatever they put on the paint penetrated because the scratching was so deep. I'm not sure exactly what they did, so they damaged the hell out of the paint, which is where all that white came in that you saw in the earlier videos. So as I proceed, I'll probably have to resand some spots to knock down the deep scratching that I put in with the lower grit sandpaper. But I'll have to proceed very carefully so that I don't remove the paint altogether. And after each and every step of this, I'm having to paint prep each panel, because you see, doing all this makes one heck of a mess. You know, the whole car, you can see there where a splatter, dusting, the slurry from wet sanding is dripping all down the car. So when I get done with all this, before I do the final polish, I'm going to have to rewash the car. Just not really much of a way around that. But just catching y'all up, I think this hood is starting to look pretty good compared to what it did look like. As I say oftentimes, I think it'll pass pretty much the 4-foot test, except for the glaring spots like where that paint has gone all the way down to the metal there. But, you know, I'm about 4 foot away now, so when you start to step in, bear in mind this has just been compounded and not polished, no protection on it whatsoever right now, because I've removed it all with paint prep. But there are still some defects in there. When you get out in the direct sunlight, you can see them. They're still there. Of course, spots like that, nothing I can do about that. If this, and this cowl area here, I don't know what the painter or whoever did there. I was able to improve that some, but not a lot. I just don't know what they did there. Nothing seems to have much of an effect on it. So I may come back to that. As you can see, I've removed the windshield wipers so I could get onto that, and I'm gonna polish those up a little bit. And as you can see over here, I've removed a couple of the emblems that were on there. And you can see that I've polished them up some, but they're so old and so damaged. That's about as good as they're gonna get without doing some more extensive work on them. I'm not sure how much they cost. I'm not sure it's worth me spending a whole lot of time on it. And what I may do is take some of these extruded, I believe they're extruded aluminum with a T-bright finish on there. I know that because I used to work at a company that made stuff like this back when I was a teenager. And see if I can't spiff that up a little bit. That one is relatively easy to get off, because all you got to do is lift this hood, trunk lid, whatever you want to call it. The motor's in the back, and there's just some nuts and bolts that kind of hold it on, so it should be relatively easy to get off and experiment with. I'm not sure what you have to go through to get these off that are down the side, but if that one on the hood turns out good, may talk to the customer about removing these and doing some work on those. You know, it's always better to keep the absolute original pieces if you can than replacing them, even with OEM parts. This thing here, not sure what you call it, needs some work, but I'm not sure what you have to go through to get that off yet. But that may be a discussion also with the customer when we see how that turns out. As you can see, done a lot of wet sanding and all down in here. It looks horrible right now, but it'll get better. This is what you expect it to look like. I've lightly wet sanded the tail light lenses, which were in bad shape, just to see how good we can clean those up. I'll polish those, and I may see if I can get them off to make them easier to polish. You see, trying to wet sand and get these white spots out has been the dilemma. This has been wet sanded, and I'm hoping at this point, what this is very deep scratches into the paint, almost down to the primer. As you can see, that there bears a startling resemblance to the primer you can see right there. So I'm thinking that some of this discoloration that he's experienced is that, where somebody has gone all the way down through the paint and into the primer. So I'm not sure how much of that is going to come out at this point. I won't know till I just get back here and start trying to buff it. But as much of that as possible has been removed very carefully with wet sanding. When I say carefully, I probably spent 2 hours or more just on this hood, trunk, whatever you want to call it, because, you know, the motor's back here, as we talked about before. So just giving y'all an idea of some of the processes I've been going through and where we're at right now. It's just a slow, tedious process. Catch y'all later.